welcome to It's Raining Litfests. We have a fantastic panel of distinguished festival founders here, and so I'll just introduce them briefly and then we'll get into it. I'm Rafil Kroll-Zaidi. I am the managing editor of Harper's Magazine based in New York. To my left is Sadaf Saaz. She is an entrepreneur, activist, and writer. She is the co-founder and producer of the Hay Festival Dhaka, and she recently published her debut collection of poetry.
Can you just speak a bit louder or have the mic?
Sure. To her left is Maina Bhagat. She is the director of the APJ Oxford Bookstore, Kolkata. She is also festival director of the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival, which showcases local, national, and international talent. Further on is Libby Owen-Edmunds. She is a sustainable tourism and development specialist for Adlib Consulting. She is also an executive board member of Responsible Tourism Partnership in Sri Lanka, and she is the co-founder of the Gokhale Literary Festival in Sri Lanka. Ulrich Schreiber is the director of the International Literature Festival Berlin, ILB, and founder of the Worldwide Reading Series. He also curates a writer's residency in Berlin. And finally, we have, last but not least, Narita Coakley is a writer and publisher. She's the author of 6 novels and several works of nonfiction and a book of short stories. She is editor of Narita Coakley Editions and a founding editor of Yatra Books, and she is co-director and co-founder of the Jaipur Literature Festival. So the first question I'd like to put to some of our panelists is, actually, I'll put it to each one in order, which is that there's especially in South Asia in recent years, but all over the world, there's been a boom in literature festivals, and I would like to know from each of you, why did you start yours?
I'm speaking on behalf of Hay Festival Dhaka. Actually, it's strange being on a panel talking about raining literature festivals as if we all sort of suddenly decided, oh, it's a cool thing to do to have a literature festival, and seeing other people doing it. Because from Bangladesh, it came out of a real need, I feel. I was part of a very small section of people writing in English, and we really felt that Bangladesh wasn't plugged into the global scene. I grew up reading sort of British Asian writers and then Indian English writers, and felt that people who were starting to write in English in Bangladesh would have absolutely no access to anywhere in the world. And so it was a real, it was a real need for our audiences to get exposed to what was going on in the outside world. And in Bangladesh, we have a very strong literary tradition, which is mainly in Bangla. And also I felt that people were not translating Bangla. Nobody else had heard of our rich literature tradition. So it was out of a real need, I think, that we started a very small festival in 2011. And now it's in our 4th year and grown amazingly. And the kind of response and the kind of, I think, contacts and the exposure that our audience are getting now was driven, I think, by real need.
Our festival, the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival, I have to admit, came out of our bookstore. We are perhaps the only festival that had its origins in a bookstore that is 94 years old. It's one of the oldest bookstores in the country, and situated as it is in Calcutta. We have seen, the bookstore has seen the life and times of the city and the nation, and Bengal, as you know, is rightly considered a very literary city, and So when we, in 2009, when our group celebrated its centenary, that is when we thought of starting this festival. We already were well into hosting literary events in our bookstore, and it was a very welcome move in the city and an extension of our presence in the literary field. So we started this in a very small way in Calcutta. Our director, Ms. Preeti Paul, and I, we thought it was the right time to bring the festival to the city, and as Sadaf was saying, you felt a need. In Kolkata, it was a reiteration of the already, large literary activities that were well in place in Calcutta. So the festival got off to a flying start. We do our events at heritage sites. We are well supported by various organizations. In particular, INTAC lets us have access to heritage sites such as the Victoria Memorial and the National Library. And I think it's a thing that Calcutta welcomed, but it's not as if Calcutta was not already into many literary activities, but this kind of redefined and brought together the larger literary community, and we're very pleased about that.
Thanks. We started the Galle Literary Festival in the south of Sri Lanka in 2007. And obviously that was 2 years before the Civil War came to an end. So things were pretty tense, particularly the last 2 years. The government had an exhibition of all things Sri Lankan in London. And at Foyle's bookshop, we were particularly promoting Sri Lankan writers in English. And we realized that there was a vast number of writers in English that no one was actually actively promoting other than this first exhibition at Foyle's. So that was one of the reasons we thought, why we started it. The second reason was that the Sri Lankan government had many years ago removed English as one of the compulsory languages within the education system. So we wanted to start a festival to promote the use of English as a link language, which we felt was very important. And our third reason why we started the festival was that Sri Lanka at the time, not unlike Pakistan, had much negative publicity continually. There was no positive publicity coming out of the country abroad about Sri Lanka. And obviously that impacted the tourism industry as well as many other things. So our third objective, and the third reason we started, was really to send positive news stories to the rest of the world about Sri Lanka and to encourage tourism to come to the south.
Yeah, I was also the founder of the festival in Berlin, and why, you ask? First of all, to underline literature in Berlin, to realize connections between the Berliners and literature and authors, also in terms of authors from the children, from the literature for children and young adults. And second, to underline the internationality of the town. And third, also the political discussions in Berlin. And I did in the 80s some festivals, and was working on Peter Weiss, the author from Germany who moved to Stockholm before the Second World War, and on Thomas Bernhard, an Austrian author. And when I was in, I think it was August 98 in Erlangen, this is a small town near Nuremberg in the south of Germany, I was in a literary festival, and I asked myself, why is not a festival in Berlin? It was so funny to see the conversations between authors and moderators, and to hear poetry readings. So I wrote a concept, and was fighting for money for 2 years, and at the end of 2000 I got 400,000 Deutsche Mark. We had in that time we had not the euro, and so we can start with the first festival in June 2001.
Well, that's a lot of different reasons to start literature festivals, but what I see as common in all of them is a desire to give voice and visibility to writers who were around. As for me, I have a very much more specific and detailed reason why I began the first literature festival, so you'd have to be a little more patient. But in 2002, I write in English, and I live in a country with 24 national languages, including Hindi, Urdu, Nepali, Marathi, Bangla, and I found that there was a huge, as a writer, I found when I met writers from the other languages, they resented us English writers. They said, "Tumko kya pata?" And that was the time, it just didn't feel nice to think that I was not part of a larger writing community. So in 2002, I helped to organize the first International Festival of Indian Literature, where we got the famous diaspora writers. There were very few English writers who were famous in India at that time, but there were a huge number of diaspora writers. So in fact, Vikram Seth was there that year. He used to live in London. There were people, many of these famous English writers were very recognized, including Sir V.S. Naipaul, who just got his Nobel Prize that very year. And then we got a lot of very famous Indian writers in from the different languages. And it began with a huge fight and a huge argument. And people said, "Aren't you upset?" And I said, "No, because every good thing begins with an argument. When people say their minds, then they clear the air." And then in 2006, I was asked to help out with the Jaipur Literature Festival, the first one. And because of my experience in 2002 with this festival. And we began a very tiny festival. We called 18 people. I mean, this is the second year and you have 100 people here. We called 18 people and only 16 turned up. And I remember the organizers started crying, "What will we do now?" And it was incredible that in just about 8 or 9 years, this festival draws about 200,000 people every year over the 5 days. So I just began it to bridge the gaps between Indian writing, English writing, and international writing.
Ulrich, you mentioned that ILB actually has a political program as part of the programming is explicitly political debate, political discussion. Why did you decide to explicitly include politics in ILB?
Because is it working here? No, the answer is of course because we are all involved in the political decisions and developments, and so because I know that a lot of authors are engaged in political questions. So no, but it was also my interest, and I wrote one book in the 33 years ago. I told you, Namita, just 2 days ago, I wrote a book on Antonio Gramsci, the political theory on Antonio Gramsci, and for me it was always important to the political discussions in Berlin and in Germany and in the world. So, and there are some very important non-fiction books, and so it was clear that we have to put political themes in the program. And the main themes were human rights and freedom of speech, of course. We had, for example, Romeo Dallaire in the program 8 years ago, who was responsible for the military forces of the UN in Rwanda. We had discussions on Sarajevo and Serbia and the Balkan, of course, and in the past year, especially on Russia. After Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist from Russia, was killed in October 2006, and last year for Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the tycoon in Russia, who was 10 years in prison, October 25th, and so we did word reading for him too, and also for Chinese authors, for Liu Xiaobo. We had word reading in 2011 and 12, and we the thing for the word readings it's also part of our work, is that in the same day a text will be read in several cities all over the world. And so we choose the Kata 08. Perhaps you heard about that, about this text. It's a declaration for freedom in China for the future. And for Liu and for Yao Yiwu, an author who came, who was not allowed to come to other festivals based in China, in Guangzhou, and he was first time. He was 2011. He was allowed in the end, and then he go back, and then he came again to Germany, and he stayed in Germany because they don't allow him to publish his book on the time when he was in prison. This was in 1999, 90, and 94. So, yeah.
So do any of our other panelists have, I guess, can you speak to your own experience or your own philosophy about how you keep politics either in or out and what's involved in that?
Yeah.
Libby?
For us, obviously, because we started at such a controversial time in the country's history, we actually made an effort to try and avoid being political, not because we didn't want to have these conversations be heard or be in the public, but actually the general consensus when we were talking to people was that they wanted creativity and fun, much more than having very in-depth and serious political discussions, which were had anyway throughout the country, in everyone's houses. There were also other platforms within the country for political discussion. But that's not to say we avoided having political discussions. Of course, we did have political discussions, but we really did make an effort to try and avoid the festival becoming a platform for politics.
I think we had a sort of similar experience when we started to avoid sort of party politics and consciously, sort of, otherwise it would sort of denigrate to the sort of lowest common denominator kind of thing. But to use fiction in a way to explore, I think, important moral and philosophical choices, because we're at a very difficult time for the country, I think. And so how to use fiction to explore that. And it was interesting because last year it was a very tumultuous year for Bangladesh, and there was a lot of polarization and binaries regarding secularism and fundamentalism, and the way that we explored it was we had a couple of it was very important, I think, for us to reflect what was going on in the country, but at the same time give a space for people to sort of step back a bit and explore important issues that normally one could not explore in sort of talk shows and other things. So we had very kind of enlightened panels on spirituality, stressing a lot of the diversity and pluralism that has been part of our 5,000-year history. So not attacking things head on, but we're trying to explore sort of freedom expression and other things, but trying to do it not in a party political way. And also Dhaka is like the sort of, NGO capital of the world, I think. So human rights, this, that, these all have become sort of mantras. So a lot of the time, other people's agendas are sort of pushed on us. So how to explore, real philosophical questions, real ethical and moral dilemmas that we're facing, but not in a sort of NGO speak. So that's the way we've been trying to do it, through different fiction and through slowly bringing in non-fiction to explore these ideas and questions.
As you're aware, in Bengal, there's a perennially political climate, so we try to stay away from those issues in our festival. And though we really make it a point to feature Bengali culture, writing, authors in the Bengali language at our festival, and we we cover all other aspects of literary, artistic, theater, music, but we do try to keep the political aspect out of it. In Calcutta, there is a very, very big Kolkata book fair, which is a very large, podium for expression of all kinds. But at the literary festival, we try to stay clear of that. That's what I can say.
The Jaipur Literature Festival, I'm proud to say, has become a part of the political dialogue in India. It's a place for free speech. It's a place for plural ideas. And every different sort of voice is accommodated there. We are apolitical in the sense that we don't subscribe to any one political party as against the other, but we do certainly sympathize with the parties that are closer to free speech and to an expression of that free speech. Last year, we had a set of sessions on Republic Day called the Republic of Ideas. And they set India on fire because there was the opening day of Republic Day, we had a session which was called after this theme, the Republic of Ideas, and we had, as usual, a very different sort of a panel of 5 people, all very different voices. And Ashish Nandi said certain things which could be construed as, Ashish Nandi is a political philosopher there, and he said something which could have offended a lot of people, which could be true from one point of view, but certainly not true and not acceptable the way he said it. It was tweeted half out of context. It became a raging national controversy. There were warrants of arrest about to be issued against him. In fact, they were. And because in India the right to free speech should not conflict with the right to free speech of other people. And in the end, it reached all the way to the Supreme Court. And I'm very happy when these things happen, except for the discomfort caused to us festival organizers and to other people, because what happens is that the dialogue gets magnified and it resonates. I mean, they say history repeats itself, one says tragedy and one says farce. They say again we had these things, but it was against a television producer called Ekta Kapoor. So it was, but it's a very much a part of our agenda. This year we had, because it's an election year, we had something called Democracy Dialogues. And on the last day we had a huge debate on democracy, where again I'm proud to say that people from very different political parties who wouldn't be seen getting up and down the same staircase sat there together. And I told them, this is not a place to politicize your agenda. This is not about your party, this is about the larger issues of democracy. And they came and we had some very, very spirited arguments, debates, and we had people from South Asia in it. We had Anis Ahmed from Bangladesh, we had Lily Wangchuk from Bhutan. So we have accepted our responsibility that if so many people come to visit us and engage with us, we have accepted the responsibility of apolitical dialogue around politics, economy, development, and all these other issues.
And we who come and attend these festivals get to see a very, dignified presentation. There are sessions with various luminaries and thinkers and writers, and it's all highly well presented and very organized. But I'm kind of curious, especially for the audience's sake, of what happens behind the scenes that they wouldn't know, whether it's sort of the worst nightmare, or how you decide whom not to invite to a literary festival. If there's anything that you can speak to from your experience that would sort of illuminate the full picture of how the organization works.
So the worst case was, I think 2 years ago, an author, I will not say who this was, but he came from, I can say, from France, And we were very glad. He's a famous author, and he came at 11, and he went with a car, with a cab, with a shuttle service. He drove from the airport to the hotel, and because the room was not free, sometimes it happens so, he told to my assistant, sorry, but I go with the first flight back to Paris. This was one case which was of course not so good. The other was, we had once a drunken moderator. He was...
Only once.
Only once, yes.
Good,
this was funny, but
drunk or not?
This was 12 years ago, so I'm not guilty anymore. So, no, but it was funny because I saw that he was a bit drunk. I don't assume that he was really total drunk, but then I decided, okay, we will do first time, and we did it not after again. We had two moderators on stage, and after 20 minutes he asked the auditorium, what do you think? May I continue the moderation or not? What do you think? Yes or no? Who is for or no? And 80%
Yes or no? What did they say?
They say no. So he went and he was sleeping when the session was finished. He was sleeping in the foyer on a couch. This was also good. So this was my, but I mean, behind is always, especially in the first years, and congratulations for this festival here, Razi and the crew, and it's the second year here, and it's well organized. I remember in the first, I don't know which experience you had, Namita, when you were 11 years or so ago in the festival in Berlin, but it was really a trouble, and I mean it is still a big trouble, but we are now better organized. But I want to say, especially in the first years, it's a big chaos. Yeah, nobody knows anything.
Well, one of the things, of course, is we never have enough money, we're always chaotic. You made it sound so good in the front, but our chaos shows through sometimes. We have two huge problems. The first is that it sounds like there are just too many people attending. You know, and it's a great delight, but there was a time when Oprah Winfrey was speaking, or when all the Indian film stars want to come and speak at our festival. We often have to say no to them simply because we don't have the capacity for the audiences. But there was one time when there were 14,000 people inside the venue, and there were 6,000 people outside the venue waiting to get in. And that was a nightmare. They were all very peaceful, and they stood in queues. So one is just the sheer capacity of the numbers that seem to come to us. And the second one, very sadly, is visas. With Pakistani writers, with so many writers, it's tragic how much paperwork is needed. I congratulate this festival for doing it so smoothly, but visas are often a very big issue. And even often international writers say, oh, I need a visa to come to India at the very last minute, but that is a very difficult part of any large festival, I think.
I would say, look, a lot of writers, let's face it, they're prima donnas. So you're dealing with some egos, for sure. And we had Gore Vidal, not saying he's got an ego or anything, come to our festival, and his luggage was lost. And of course, Gore Vidal, he only, actually almost every day of his life, he wore an Armani suit. And of course, all his suits were stuck somewhere still between New York and Colombo. So he had to borrow someone's tracksuit. And he was, let's just say, one very angry individual. And the only way we could calm him was basically feeding him whiskey 24/7. He ate up every journalist that came near him, and I had many a phone call from journalists in tears. He kicked me out. Look, I think there's many scandals that go on behind the scenes. There's the serious stuff about trying to get money. Yeah, every festival struggles for sponsorship, and you never really know at some point during the year whether you're going to have enough money to fly all the authors you've committed and all those kind of things. But the fun stuff that really tends to test one's patience generally comes from the writers themselves, and they're misbehaving.
I I remember about Gaur Vidal because we were so excited because he was supposed to come to the Jaipur festival after Gaul, and I heard about all that, and of course he didn't then come to Jaipur.
No,
the cancelled tickets are also very depressing.
In Kolkata, we've had all the usual hiccups that you were talking about, but the one big worry is often if an author should fall ill or there should be any kind of emergency, and there was one such. We had Leela Seth, the most delightful friend and writer, with us in Calcutta last year, and she took quite ill, and we had to, admit her, but she was insistent that she would do her event anyhow the next day, and she did too, but we were hovering around her like, guardian angels. And then I think our stress is more before the festival, because no matter how much curate a festival, my strong belief is that only that is destined to stay will stay, because till the end there will be writers who can't make it, and there will be others who join in at the last moment. But we are ready for, I think all festival directors have to be ready for any exigency, and that's the way we do it. Thank you.
I think, everything everybody said is kind of starting with handling egos. I think is a huge part, and like when you're starting the festival and you have to do so much of the management stuff yourself, and then if you have a crisis on top of that, you've got actually things you actually have to do, and then manage the crisis. And this year our festival was at the end of a 96-hour strike, which means that nothing can be done. And of course, it's like, yes, I know, but we have to get it done anyway, kind of thing. So within the strike, the best thing was that Dhaka traffic is really horrendous normally. And when there's a strike, it was, there was, this sort of scare that somebody's going to throw a bomb at your car or this or that. But literally for 4 days, I went around I could do like 10 things in one day when I could normally have done probably 2 things, because the streets were sort of clear. But getting in the books from the border and literally having to send somebody in an ambulance to collect the books from the border to get the job done, and pay people to sort of stay overnight in tents at the venue because they couldn't go back and forth. So all of that was there, and then the sort of my sort of security advisors, like there were about 15 men standing around me telling me how we couldn't go ahead with the festival. So I heard everybody's opinion, and I'm like, okay boys, let's just go for it now. They're like, okay, right. And then it was fine. It was a wonderful festival, and we did the due diligence of having everything in place. But
yes, I just like to add, the security aspect is very worrying. We had Amir Khan at our opening last month, and it took months of planning to arrange the security, that also at a venue like Victoria Memorial, they were very demanding, and I think our team must have spent 3 days and nights, seeing that everything, and at the end of it, it was so well organized that even the curator of Victoria Memorial said he expected to hear the crowd yell, Amir, Amir, and they were very quiet because there was so much security present. But those are the things behind the scenes that you have to kind of...
And there's one more thing, if I could say, that this session is called It's Raining Litfests. And it was raining yesterday, and I was in the Patna Literature Festival just before this, and I looked up the weather forecast, and it said 3 days of rain, so much. I told them, they said, it never rains, Patna mein to barish padti nahi hai. So I said, check it out, and of course it rained through and all the beautiful venue collapsed. And this year in the Jaipur Festival, we have these, with so many people, there are no indoor venues, we have these outdoor tents, and my co-director William Dalrymple, being Scottish, British, keeps looking at the weather forecast, and he rang me up at night with the Norway weathercast, which all of you must note, the most accurate weather forecast is the Norwegian weather forecast, and well, it said there's going to be like monsoon conditions conditions. And we laughed, because Jaipur is a desert state, monsoon conditions, but it rained and it rained and it rained, and all our venues collapsed. And the producer said, what should we do? And I said, we'll do it in this corridor, we'll do. So we had impromptu places for all the sessions, and people loved it because the real spirit of the festival. So you can't rain a good festival out, is the rule.
Really. So, yes, actually I saw in the program that the name of this panel varied back and forth between it's raining Litfests and it's raining Litfest, which makes it sound just like a substance, like there's so much of it, it almost washes over us now. And we've spoken about individual reasons that are very specific to place and context for starting our panelists' respective festivals, but the expansion we've seen in recent years, I just wonder if anyone has an idea of what, if there's some sort of moment or movement in global culture that motivated that proliferation, anything that you see, whether it might have to do with, whether there might be a parallel with the growth, the sort of the regrowth of live concerts as almost a kind of pushback against this agony of immediate digital reproducibility, if the function of the function or relationship of literature to its readers has been changing. It's not something that I have a specific idea about, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I have a few thoughts, and then I could maybe, can you hear me? It could probably kick off a few more thoughts, because I'm always puzzled by the growth of this literature festival that we are associated with. And I think it's partly what you said, that the digital loneliness and the digital crowd, and then you want real voices and real people. I also think that it is because we live in such puzzling times, we live in times of such accelerated change, that when you hear a diversity of voices that actually train you to think again, it's a very rewarding thing. So you go to one festival, you are hooked, and you want to go to more and more, because it's like going to a wellness spa for the mind. Because I forget, because of programming so many festivals, what fun they are, and here I am wandering around, wondering which one to attend. But a festival is a bit like being in an installation art thing. It's not like you hang up the paintings and it's done. You never know the chemistry of two people and how it unfolds. And you are part of the argument. So I think that's very important. And I think the most important side effect of all these festivals in South Asia is there are more than 55 now, I'm told, and it's an old tradition of Sahityotsav, of public gatherings, of, at least in Bengal, we know this, and in many other parts of India, public celebration of literature is nothing new. But multilingual, many, here you have Urdu, you have Punjabi. I went to those sessions, they were absolutely vibrant and stunning. So I think it's that multivocality, remembering your own languages. English flattens everything out so much. It's such a joy, even if you can't read. I can see her nodding in agreement. So even if you can't read Bangla literature, if you can hear it, if you can hear the Urdu, you can hear the Punjabi, you get your voices back. It's an assertion of your own culture. And if you visit a new city, then you visit it through the cross levels of a literature festival, you understand it at a completely different level. And a new literary community of like-minded people who believe in the life of the mind is emerging around South Asia. So I think it's a very, very serious thing. The Harvard Business School did a study on the Jaipur Literature Festival over 2 years, and they taught it in 2 different courses over 2 years. They tried to figure out these things too, but I don't think they knew very much more than you and I do. They were as puzzled.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would say is that clearly coming to a literary festival, I hope all of you've had a great time, and I mean, not only are they interesting and they awaken the brain cells on a different level, but they're also fun, and you get it really brings literature alive and brings it home for everyone. And I think in terms of the plethora of festivals that have come up, I mean, in the UK, I think there's something like 25 festivals, so that's one every other weekend happening. It really depends on every individual geographic location's objectives of why they're having that festival, but at the end of the day, they're incredibly enjoyable.
I mean, another reason is, beside the thing that the people want to hear readings and so, is that they want to know more about the authors. Beside this, what is written in the book, this is an important reason, I think. And I want to turn out another thing, the economic question. In relation to theater festivals and jazz festivals, music festivals, theater literature festival is very cheap. Yeah, you have only to bring the author to the town, or if he is in town already in Jaipur or in Dhaka, then it's much more cheaper. You have also not to pay for the hotel. So, and especially in New York, it's very cheap, I think, to realize such a festival. Because of that, you can do in New York a festival without bringing the authors from abroad to the town. No, this is an important thing, and in Europe it's so that you will often get support from embassies and cultural institutions, foundations, and cultural institutes for the flights and the hotel, and so it's not so expensive. It's not a very big deal. When you start it small, when you start it in a bigger way, then it's another question. But this is also an important thing.
In terms of the financials, even though there are a lot happening, it's not necessarily also because you make money from festivals either. So it's not necessarily because it's a successful business venture where people are making big profits, which is why there are so many. Actually, even though it costs far less than theatre productions, they still cost money, and raising money for culture or anything like the arts is always challenging, particularly in certain countries which some of us represent.
Speak about the reader, and the author, and the book, which are the basis of any festival. Now, when you engage in reading, you connect with the author in a certain way. But when you meet the author, and the author allows you to enter his mind, in a physical space, I think that is what is the attraction of literary festivals, because it gives a face and persona to the author which you may not get by just reading the book. Because we've had these delightful, enlightening experiences at our bookstore, where we, of course, host either an author at a time or panel discussions. We host a lot of panel discussions like this one at our store. So I think that is something that is really at the core of any literary activity, that you engage with the author in a meaningful way, and perhaps that gives you an insight into his writing, the workings of his mind, and that adds to your pleasure and your insight into the book.
I think the other thing is this idea, or literature festivals open the idea that it's not necessarily literature as something very highbrow, or it cannot be something that I, as a normal person, can engage with. And I think it's opened the door to, I think, a lot of people who maybe read something, but it opens their mind to a whole lot of different conversations and books and reading, which they may have felt a bit. I mean, there are of course voracious readers who have always read, but this has kind of opened the door to a lot more people to sort of try reading different types of books, or enjoying, I think, the discourse and conversations, which sometimes, like in this corporate era, which is, even though we have lots of different outlets for media, it's also determined sometimes by the corporate sponsor, or this talk show will talk about this, whereas I think there is this openness which is more egalitarian and probably promotes freedom of speech more than a lot of other mediums. Maybe internet is like sound bites, and nobody has intention for more than 4 lines or something. So I think that this is maybe one of the reasons why I think Hay Festival, Dhaka, Jaipur, and other festivals I've been to are so successful.
Two other reasons I want to it's a meeting point of the literary community of the town. You can see here, I think everybody knows here that the LLT is going on. And the second thing is there are some authors that don't go to literary festivals at all. Some very, very seldom, like John Coetzee. And but mostly, I think 90% they like to come to festivals not only for the presentation of their works, but also for the communication between them and other authors.
Absolutely. But most important, they sell books. Festivals do help books get sold.
Excuse me,
and
can I just say a word?
in the Jaipur Festival, I'm so proud to say that we sell such a huge quantity of books. Just in those 5 days, our festival bookshop alone sells them, but around India, people who are following it on YouTube and television, and the publishing cycle in India has actually changed because of this. All the books, not only in India, but a lot of very good books in South Asia, aim for a January publication so that they can come around the time of the Jaipur Festival, and if they are featured there, it does help sell books, and selling books means reading books, and so it's part of the same cycle of thinking, reading, writing.
Might I just say something? This is the Lahore Literary Festival, and I don't know why one of us was not added to the panel, because I think that I ought to have been here to have learned something from you all. So just as well that I was here, and it's been a great sort of eye-opener to see how you guys have, how you started and how far you've got. And many of the things that you were mentioning were absolutely what we have faced. But something I think perhaps Libby alluded to is I think that for Lahore and Karachi possibly also, it's an act of resistance. And I think it's really reclaiming that public space, which historically we have had always, and Lahore has been a great center of learning, and it's something we have lost, and we've allowed to have lost ourselves, you know. We have just accepted it quietly. And I think a bit of that is, I think certainly for Lahore and Karachi, I think perhaps I can't speak for them, but it may be also because there's so much trouble here happening in our cities. And a lot of problems, we've had many writers not coming, some big names who I won't mention, because they felt that there was a political instability in the area, in the region. And they have cited the reasons of insecurity. So I think that also is something that we are having to face, and you see a lot of security around also. But thank you all for coming, and I hope we guys make a kind of, keep meeting at festivals or we come back to Lahore again.
Well, on behalf of all of us, I'd say we applaud your act of resistance, and a big clap for the Lahore Festival. And I wouldn't call it resistance, I'd say assertion.
Anyway, if you want, I'm so happy to listen to all of you, and especially I come to Namita Coakley that it's a great event for the sale of books, which of course I have seen. I've been coming, I came last year also, and this year also, and of course I'm invited because I'm the author of Lahore Sentimental Journey, which has been in circulation for the last 20 years. And the Pakistan also, their publishers in OJP Karachi, it took the copyright from Penguin, and 7 years ago they published it here, and it was a big function, launch of that book. I came especially from India. But unfortunately, I pointed out last year also, my book is not available here at any stall, and OJP has never bothered even to send the books last year to other bookstalls. And again this year, hundreds of boys and girls have come to me that your book is not available. Even my friends, I have brought some books from India. They say it is impossible to get the book. So last year and this year, they would have sold at least 400-500 copies of the book. But they are not interested. So I think the festival authorities, they organize the festival, they should ensure that the author comes all the way from India, at least his book. Of course, I am author of other 10, 12 books, I am not talking about that, but especially Lahore, which is become a classic, they should ensure that this book is available in the bookshops.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's an issue with a lot of authors trying to get their books in time and trying to get enough quantities. I'm sure for anyone who's
She said she got them on an ambulance. She said, I got the books on an ambulance. It sounded, but I agree that they should indeed be very careful about stocking books in time.
My question is for Sadaf. Sadaf.
Yeah.
From a country like yes,
Oh, okay, yeah.
in a country like Bangladesh, for the first time organizing a literary festival where you are not having so many English writers and a large audience. So, which was the difficulties and the hurdles you did face and to make an appeal and make an interest of the organizer in your festival? How did you come through all these?
Well, it's interesting. We started as a small pilot festival using the British Council grounds, and it was very much contacting, basically having the whole of the sort of English, literary circle that was involved in English writing and critiquing. So we had about a very small festival, about 1,000 people. And then the following year, we had about 15,000 people at the Bangla Academy, which is the sort of soul of Bangla literature. Because in 1971, we basically, we got rid of English from the curriculum, and we were very much sort of had a lot of very national pride in Bangla, writing in Bangla. And so when we actually held the festival, we actually had a lot of, not a lot, but we had a small but significant resistance to the fact that Bangla Academy was being used as an international literature festival. And the Bangla Academy director was, he thought, as we did, that what better place to have an international literature festival to showcase our Bangla literature festival to the Bangla literature to the rest of the world, and our English writing in Bangla. That why shouldn't Bangladeshi writers writing in English be showcased everywhere in the world? I mean, why should we confine ourselves to just Bangladesh? But I remember sort of 2 days before the festival, I knew that there was going to be a huge protest outside, that why are we going to have a festival in English? Of course, we had about 40% of the panels were in Bangla, and amazing panels in Bangla, and anybody who was anybody kind of in the Bangla literature circle was involved as well. So we were very, conscious of that. But in the end, there was actually 7 people protesting outside, but we let them in and let them distribute pamphlets and,
The more, the merrier. And I think we're out of time, I've been told. So one more question.
I just wanted to clarify, because obviously there are issues about books not being here. I'm a bookseller at this particular venue, and there were certain challenges that we faced that people don't know about because they happen in the background. I don't want to have 100 copies of Orhan Pamuk, but I do, because that was one of the high-profile people who pulled out. Some people confirm a few weeks before they arrive, and also Pakistan being, something of a security concern, means that they will, understandably, agree 3 weeks before the actual event happens. So that in some cases is not enough time to get books in. So these sorts of things which happen in the background, you will not know about, but there are reasons why there are certain things that might appear not to be catered to. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That's a good point. It happens all the time. Authors pull out at the last minute, and you have 500 of their books, of which you sell 2 copies that festival, and it takes you 10 years, 20 years to get rid of them. Or a last-minute author agrees, and you don't have any of their books. So it's a challenge.
Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.